Hello, welcome to my first press review for 2014. So I'll take the opportunity to wish you a happy new year and hopefully a more peaceful one. As usual, press review brings you top headlines from the UK and international papers as we delve in analysis from international renowned sources in the light of Mideast's top stories. And joining us today for the show will be political analyst Dr. Abdulrahman Jamil as we look at the unrest in Iraq and continue our coverage on the Syrian conflict. We will also look at significant indications that the Syrian rebel groups have used chemical weapons last August, affecting US policy with regards to the matter, in addition to a report on Syrian refugees in Greece. But first, let's start as usual with papers here in the UK. The Guardian leads its front page reporting on 6 big energy firms denying Labour claims that they paid a market rate excess of £4 billion for power. The paper also reports on India, who has terminated a £466 million helicopter order with Augusta Westland following accusations that the firm bribed officials, and features a picture of a young member of a US marching band tooting his clarinet as he warms up before yesterday's New Year's Day parade in London. The Independent's front page leads with an exclusive interview with Energy Minister Ed Davey, who claims that a giant European network of electricity interconnectors is the solution to high energy prices in Britain. The front page also reports on recreational cannabis legalized in Colorado on New Year's Day, along with a picture of partygoers smoking marijuana during a New Year's Eve party at a Denver bar. And the Daily Telegraph front page leads its news with a report on murderers who could now get hundreds of years in jail to get round the European court ban. And as restrictions on the UK labour market were lifted, the Telegraph looks at Labour MP Keith Vaz greeting one of the first Romanians to fly into Britain, Victor Spirsou, as he arrives at Luton Airport. And now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. As the UN declares 2013 deadliest year for Iraq, we take a look at various opinions on this issue. Al Monitor features analysis titled "Ending Iraq's Demonstrations Won't Solve Sunni Crisis" by Mustafa Al-Kadhimi, who believes that the Sunni demonstrations may not last much longer, but the end will not mean that Iraq's sectarian problems have been addressed. Al-Kadhimi believes that it's not easy to establish a roadmap for any crisis, especially in a country as complex as Iraq. This applies to most challenges faced by Iraq in the past 10 years, including the Sunni demonstrations that launched in December 2012. The writer claims that the demonstrations, which began with arrest warrants on charges on terrorism for some security staffers working for Iraqi Finance Minister Rafi al-Isawi, have changed their goals more than once. They raise some general slogans that continuously escalate before being diffused. Al-Kadhimi points out that Iraqi political parties have taken advantage of the demonstrations for a full year to implement certain policies. Some parties bargained on behalf of the Sunni demonstrations for personal gains. Other parties tried to use the demonstrations to intimidate the public and showcase their radicalism in the hope of winning votes. Al-Kadhimi adds that for a full year the Iraqi government was inconsistent in its dealings with the demonstrations. In the early days there was some confusion when the government used excessive force in cracking down on them. But then the government's accusations were gradually withdrawn and it agreed to negotiate. Al-Kadhimi argues that the Sunni demonstrations in Anbar will likely draw to a close. Everything indicates that the sit-ins will soon end, hopefully in a peaceful manner and not by a military confrontation. Ending the Anbar demonstrations, however, as happened in other cities, will not address the essence of the crisis. The writer sees that at the national level, what's needed are radical solutions to the issues that fuel the protests, leaving things hanging and treating the end of the sit-ins as the end of the political, social and sectarian crisis would be unwise. He also stresses that the Iraqi government and the various Iraqi political forces should try addressing the deep national rifts that produced the Anbar demonstrations. Those rifts keep threatening the country with civil war or partition. And to conclude, Al-Kadhimi states that the crisis is about the mutual suspicion accumulated over years and perhaps decades between Iraqi cities, peoples and sects. Iraq's politicians should act responsibly and in accordance with a long-term strategy to eliminate these suspicions and replace them with national trust as a permanent solution. The English Guardian features a report by Luke Harding headlined "Iraq suffers its deadliest year since 2008. The report declares that the violence in Iraq has reached its worst levels since 2008. The report cites the UN as saying that 7,818 civilians died last year. The total, including members of the Iraqi security forces, surged to 8,868, with 759 people killed in December alone. Harding also refers to a report published on Wednesday by Iraq Body Count, a British-based NGO who confirmed the trend, predicting that the coming year could be more bloody than the last. The NGO's own figures suggest 9,475 civilians were killed in 2013, compared with 10,130 in 2008. The group also said Al-Qaeda in Iraq has found fertile ground all this discontent and has attacked the Iraqi government by killing members of its army, its police forces, its politicians and journalists, as well as its Shia population. Harding claims that the spike in violence can be attributed to several factors, including the crackdown by Iraq's Shia-led government on a Sunni protest camp last April, in which 49 people were shot dead. These killings spawned numerous revenge attacks against Shia targets in Baghdad and across the rest of Iraq. To conclude, Harding states that the levels of violence are now comparable to the dark days of 2008, though back then the death toll was falling rather than rising. They are not as bad as 2006 and 2007 when the country came close to civil war. The resurgence has taken advantage of the departure of US forces in 2011 and an influx of foreign fighters. The Middle East Online features an article by W.G. Dunlop headlined "What does 2014 have in store for Iraq?", in which the writer claims that experts warn that if current violence levels continue unabated throughout the coming year, then 2014 threatens to be as deadly as 2004. Dunlop refers to Iraq Body Count IBC, a Britain-based NGO that tracks violence in Iraq, as saying one has to go back to 2008 to find comparable levels of violence. In the year, however, that was a declining total from the much higher levels of 2006 and 2007, with the second half of 2008 less violent than the first. Iraq Body Count added that in 2013 the trend is in the opposite direction, with around two-thirds of the deaths occurring in the second half of the year. If current violence levels continue unabated throughout the coming year, then 2014 might be as deadly as 2004. Dunlop says that two main factors fueled the sharp spike in violence, according to experts. One is widespread discontent among Iraq's minority Sunni Arab community members, which say that they were marginalized by the country's Shiite-led government and unfairly targeted by heavy-handed security tactics. Dunlop cites John Drake, a security specialist with risk management firm AKE Group, as saying, "Tensions have been gradually rising since late 2012, but the storming of the anti-government protest camp in April and subsequent killing of protesters prompted a violent backlash by armed members of the Sunni community." And to conclude, John Drake says that the rise in fighting in neighboring Syria has given militants a strategic boost. They now have the opportunity to create some sort of a safe zone crossing the border of the two countries in which they can operate with minimal interference from the authorities. And joining us today on the show is political analyst Dr. Abdulrahman Jamil. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jamil. Can you hear me?
You're welcome.
My first question to you, Dr. Jamil, why has the Iraqi government been inconsistent with dealing with demonstrations?
Well, I think this is true. I mean, the government led by al-Maliki has always been inconsistent with that. The reason why is because, you see, the government is composed of a coalition of too many different groups, political groups. And I think Maliki himself cannot take a decision on his own. And that's why it makes it very difficult for him to go ahead with any decision he might think can solve a problem here and there. And I think especially when it comes with the demonstrations in Al-Anbar, I think you are talking about Al-Anbar.
Yes.
I think you see the Sunni the Sunni groups within the government now, led by the leader of the parliament, the speaker of the parliament, and other ministers and MPs, they always try to, discourage him from taking such an action. But now with the people in Anbar, as he said, as he put it on Wednesday, that they asked for the army to help them get rid of the Al-Qaeda groups who try to establish a base in Anbar. I think he had to go ahead with it and try to make a decision, a very harsh one, a very difficult one, I think, for him, to try to fight Al-Qaeda. As he said that too many people within the demonstration site are giving them support, and they becoming like the home of Al-Qaeda, and the flags of Al-Qaeda has been hoisted in the demonstration area, and I think that situation required of al-Maliki to take action. Otherwise, he would lose his political influence in the country.
Sure. And speaking of this difficult decision, al-Maliki said the war will continue in Anbar to rescue the residents from terrorist groups, like you said. But analysts believe that this can be catastrophic. Would you agree?
You see, there are different opinions. If you listen to the media, especially nowadays with Iraq having this problem, because these terrorists, as we all know, even the Americans, the British, many countries believe that they try to move from because they are losing ground in Syria. So they are trying to move eastward and getting into Iraq, where the land is open for them, and it's a good hiding place for them. They want to establish, and I think they did establish some training camps, and even they hide their weapons, and they have the four-wheel drive cars with heavy machine guns on them. So I think they're trying to get back to Iraq, and the people in Anbar, of course, led by some tribal leaders, they believe that they should welcome these people because they are Sunnis. But I don't think this is the situation. The whole thing is a political conflict in Iraq nowadays, and it has been going on since 2003.
Right.
Remember that the demonstration, the demonstrators in Anbar have been calling for the last year of their presence there, just to, they say that they have just demands, but I think nobody questioned these demands. The demands are to abolish the constitution, the current constitution, and to release all prisoners, even Saddam's generals who are still in prison, and to abolish the debathification law and the terrorist law number 3, in addition to other demands which are not related to their community or to their province, Al-Anbar province. They didn't demand development of their country or building more schools or hospitals, but I think they insist on these political demands. That's why one of the reasons why the government was over-patient, and they tried to put an end to that.
Certainly. Dr. Abdul Majid, al-Maliki, President al-Maliki said that it's about rescuing the residents. However, you mentioned that these very residents, the tribal groups, do welcome these terrorist groups or Sunni groups or whatsoever. So in that sense, would you find this contradictory? So the president is trying to rescue the residents while they're actually welcoming these groups?
No, you see, if you look at the, demographic map of Iraq, of Anbar in particular, it has always been. That's why Saddam, at that time, they called them the white province, because they did not revolt against him in the 1991 revolution in Iraq, which was put down by Saddam. Mm-hmm. Now that province continued to house or to accommodate people who are against the change in 2003. So, and they still, consider themselves as the opposition, but some of them, accepted reality that they cannot do anything, so they joined the government. Some of them even, that was not a free endeavor, but I think they got money against that. Even the Sahwat, the Sahwa they call them, mm-hmm. The awakening groups within the Sunni tribes, yes. They were given money in order to change their position. Maybe when the money stops, I think they reverse. They go back to the other tribes. I think there is a division, a line of division, which has become very clear nowadays in Al-Anbar. people or tribes who would like to stay with the government, and people who, they say no because we have enough money coming from outside the country, especially from, as the reports, as even the Independent, talked about that a few days ago, that money coming from Saudi Arabia, money coming from Qatar, just to help them do the job of, trying to topple the government in Iraq.
And back to protesters, Dr. Jamil, you mentioned that certainly there is an inconsistency in dealing with these protests. However, they did not achieve their ambitions, and yet they gradually shrank. They became small-scale demonstrations. Why do you think so? Is it also because of lack of funding? Do you think money is involved in fueling these demonstrations, or why did they actually shrink?
We know very well that these militant groups, we call them Al-Qaeda or the jihadis in that part of the world, especially in the Middle East and even in Mali, whatever, they cannot fight on their own. There is no ideology as such, pushing them to do that, to kill themselves and to kill others, But I think there is money here. I mean, we're talking about financing, and the finance comes always from the rich, sheikhs in the Gulf, and maybe someone else. I don't know. Maybe even America pays them money. We don't know. But they work for money. If the money is cut off, if we try to find where the money come from, and somebody try to cut these sources, I think we will see like a decline of their activities in the not only in Iraq but elsewhere. The same thing happening in Syria. Look at them. Who is supporting these militants? I mean, some of them call themselves the jihadis, others call themselves the Islamic army. Whatever names you have, they have it. So I think all depends on money. Now, if you look at Saudi Arabia now, is giving a lot of money. I don't know how many billions of dollars paying to Lebanon to encourage the army to take such an action, probably against some other groups. So maybe Hezbollah or whatever. It is. I think it's a big game. I'm afraid it's a big game in this part of the world, and it will continue as long as the money keeps coming in, and these groups are ready to receive that money to do whatever they want them to do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil, for your contribution.
You're welcome.
That was political analyst Dr. Abdurrahman Jamil. Thanks very much again. Now let's continue with our coverage on the Middle East. With Geneva 2 less than 3 weeks away, let's take a look at what today's press is saying regarding to the Syrian crisis. The Global Research features an article looking at media disinformation. In its article, the mainstream now admits that the Syrian rebels have chemical weapons. The article begins by taking a look at an investigative piece by Seymour Hersh, an award-winning journalist who regularly features in the New York Times. Hersh writes, "I found intense concern and on occasion anger over what was repeatedly seen as the deliberate manipulation of intelligence." One high-level intelligence officer in an email to a colleague called the administration's assurances of Assad's responsibility a ruse. Global Research then looks at former CIA officer Philip Giraldi, who writes on foreign and defense affairs for the American Conservative. He first broke the story of a threatened mass resignation by top intelligence analysts over Syria chemical weapons claims in mid-November. Giraldi said that with all evidence considered, the intelligence community found itself with numerous skeptics in the ranks, leading to sharp exchanges with the Director of Central Intelligence John Brennan and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. A number of analysts threatened to resign as a group if their strong dissent was not noted in any report released to the public, forcing both Brennan and Clapper to back down. This led to the White House issuing its own assessment, completely divorcing the process from any direct connection to the intelligence community. Global Research says that the American public had no knowledge of this internal conflict and dissent within the intelligence community while it was happening, and few know of it today. More surprising is that while the ongoing UN investigation was center stage throughout September, the final UN findings on chemical weapons usage in Syria were published this last Thursday, yet received little focus in major American media reporting or analysis. Global research continues by taking a look at a UN report which states that chemical weapons were probably used at 5 sites in Syria during the 2.5-year-long conflict. Most significant is that at 2 sites the victims were Syrian government soldiers, and at other the victims were regime soldiers and civilians. While the purpose of the investigation was not to establish the culprit in each attack, the report identifies the victims in 3 out of the 5 incidents as regime soldiers. This is a tacit UN admission that the rebels possess and have used chemical weapons. The article adds that for those that did their homework while questions of Syria chemical attacks were the hot topic in August and September, credible allegations of rebel chemical weapons are nothing new. Global research concludes that revelations of the deep divide within the US intelligence community over the August 21st chemical attack and Obama's push for intervention, along with the just-released UN report confirming that chemical weapons were used against the regime troops in the majority of attack sites, should get common-sense Americans questioning everything they were ever told by establishment sources concerning chemical weapons and Syria. Free Malaysia today features an article from Shamil Norshidi titled Unconquered Truth of Syria. Norshidi looked at US President Barack Obama's speech claiming the Syrian regime was responsible for the chemical attack and says the next week saw the American so-called intelligentsia debating whether or not to attack Syria. Wolf Blitzer of CNN proved adamant to get inside the mind of Bashar al-Assad, the labeled master of deception. Satan would have received a better reception than did Assad in those weeks. As a Malaysian, as one tuned to value logic over emotion, the truth to the Syrian chemical attack is plainly recognizable. Norshidi says, unless Assad was missing a brain or for the day had turned erratic, he would not have ordered a sarin attack. He didn't. Quite simply, it was Saudi Arabia who embedded and aided anti-government forces to implement the lethal attacks. Even before observing evidence, motive alone showcases the latter conclusion. Norshidi asks, why would Assad order a sarin attack if he was winning the war? In an August 22nd report by the Human Rights Watch, it was also known that UN chemical weapons inspectors who had been invited by Assad were staying at the Damascus Four Seasons Hotel, 12 kilometers from the site of the attack. With full knowledge that UN observers were in town, why would the Syrian president provide purpose for international intervention, especially after Obama had outlined chemicals as a red line? The logic here lies discordant to the so-called confirmed accusations. Norshidi also points out that Saudi Arabia not only has incentive but has publicly emphasized its want for the ouster of Assad's administration. Just last week, the Saudi Kingdom's ambassador to London, Prince Mohammed Nawaf, proclaimed the Syrian regime as the greatest weapon of mass destruction. The writer adds that in a Mint Press investigation released on August 29th, Prince Bandar bin Sultan Al Saud, the Saudi chief of intelligence, was identified as a supplier for the used chemical weapons. The militants interviewed in the report, unnamed for security, complained on how the prince, whom they called Al Habib, provided insufficient information as to handling the chemicals. The reporter of the Mint Press article later received threats from the Saudi embassy to retract the article. Norshidi adds that behind these facts lies the simple truth that the Saudis have long pursued oil export domination. The fall of Assad's regime plays constructive in Saudi control of oil supply. The more accusations, the more the sanctions. The more sanctions, the more Syria's oil economy crumbles. Beyond financial gain emerges the contention of conservative Sunni Saudi Arabia versus Shiite Alawite Syria. Norshidi concludes by saying that if Assad continues in strength, if the Syrian civil war continues in stalemate, I predict that the US and its puppet nations will seek excuse to intervene. The August 21st chemical attacks were insufficient in convincing the American public to support a strike on Syria. Washington, D.C. will not make the same miscalculation. Abid Alouche writes for the Greek Reporter, taking a look at Syrian refugees in his article, Syrian refugees having a hard time in Greece. Alouche says as the civil war in Syria gets worse day by day, the number of refugees who seek better luck has been constantly increasing. The host countries in Europe and the Middle East have grown uneasy over the new arrivals. Greece is the main and easiest access for Syrian refugees to reach Europe. Alouche says that many incidents showing that xenophobic behaviors and racist attitudes have infiltrated to the Greek police authorities came to light by the Greek magazine Hot Dog last week. The Greek chief of police advised officers that undocumented immigrants should be detained for as long as possible and their lives must be made unbearable. He adds that since last summer, all Syrian refugees who managed to get to Greece were automatically granted a 6-month permit that can be renewed. However, those who make it to Greece confront terrible living conditions. Refugees and undocumented immigrants that arrive at the Greek islands are detained for days in overcrowded cells. Whole families have to sleep in parks even in cold weather. Moreover, the procedure that a refugee had to follow in order to even apply for an asylum takes too long, or it is being stalled by Greek authorities. Alouche concludes that the Syrian refugees who managed to get to Greece have to face the hostility and brutality of Greek authorities in addition to the dangerous attempt to even leave their country. Greek police and Coast Guards officers have been involved in many cases of ill treatment and illegal pushbacks of refugees, mainly Syrians intercepted along the Greek-Turkish border. Now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. The International New York Times front page leads its news with the headline "Chinese prostitutes sent to labor camps." And the Emirati Gulf News leads its front page with the headline "Outlook bright for global markets." And finally, the Chinese Global Times front page leads its news with the headline "Public warm to Xi's speech." And for more updates, please visit us at levant.tv. That was some analysis we gathered for today's press review. Do follow us tomorrow in another press review. Bye now.